the dangerous truth about being too smart. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the more clearly you see the world, the more alienated you feel from it. That knowledge, insight, and deep understanding, once celebrated in childhood as brilliance, now function like a curse. You see through illusions others desperately cling to. You question systems that everyone else accepts. You find patterns in chaos, but no one wants to hear about them. What starts as a gift quickly becomes a burden, and the more intelligent you are, the more you begin to feel like a stranger in your own society. That's not an exaggeration, it's a philosophical truth, and it's terrifying. Let's get right to it. Society is afraid of intelligent people, not because they're evil or dangerous in the way movies portray, but because they disrupt the comfort of the collective narrative. Most people don't want to think deeply. Most people don't want to confront the void or wrestle with the limitations of human reason, or ask themselves what it really means to be free in a world shaped by invisible constraints. And when someone comes along who's capable of doing exactly that, who sees what others refuse to see, it makes them uncomfortable. That discomfort turns into resistance, and that resistance becomes rejection.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Schopenhauer, one of the darkest yet most brilliant philosophers in history, understood this dynamic deeply. He said, "The wise have always said the same things, and fools, who are the majority, have always done just the opposite." That's the paradox of intelligence. It gives you a clearer view of the world, but the clearer your view, the more isolated you become. Because what you see often contradicts what most people want to believe, and people don't take kindly to those who disrupt their illusions. But let's go deeper. What is it about intelligence that threatens society? It's not the facts. It's not even the conclusions. It's the process. Intelligent people think differently. They ask questions that others avoid. They observe patterns, challenge assumptions, and resist easy answers. They're not satisfied with surface-level explanations or feel-good narratives. And that mindset is inherently subversive, because once you start asking real questions about politics, religion, identity, morality, meaning, you begin to untangle the very fabric that holds society together. That's dangerous. That's powerful, and that's why intelligent people, especially those who speak up, often find themselves alone. Here's a thought experiment. What happens when a highly intelligent person walks into a room full of people who value conformity, tradition, and emotional security above truth? At first, they're admired, they're gifted, brilliant, unique, but soon admiration turns into suspicion. Their insights are too sharp, their language is too precise, their refusal to buy into groupthink is quietly resented. And eventually society finds a way to exclude them, whether through mockery, dismissal, or subtle alienation. It's not always overt, it's not always malicious, but it's real. So what do you do if you're one of those people? If you've ever felt like your mind moves faster than your surroundings, like your questions are too big for the room you're in, like you're being punished for thinking clearly in a world that rewards illusion, what then? Do you shrink yourself? Do you pretend not to see? Or do you lean in, knowing that the path of the intelligent is often lonely but never meaningless? Here's the thing. Intelligence is not just IQ. It's not just logic or memory or the ability to solve equations. True intelligence is the capacity to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. It's the ability to hold complexity, to endure ambiguity, to question your own assumptions while dissecting others. And that kind of intelligence is terrifying, not just to others, but sometimes to yourself, because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And that often means confronting painful realities about your life, your society, even your own mind. But that confrontation is where freedom begins. When you stop needing everyone to understand you, when you stop trying to fit into a world that was never built for minds like yours, when you stop apologizing for your perception, that's when something extraordinary happens. You begin to live not for approval, but for truth. Not for comfort, but for clarity. Not for validation, but for vision. Let me ask you something raw and real. Have you ever held back your thoughts because you knew they'd make people uncomfortable? Have you ever dumbed yourself down, hidden your insights, played along just to avoid the loneliness of being too much? If the answer is yes, then you already understand the dangerous truth we're talking about. But here's the deeper question. What would your life look like if you stopped doing that? Who would you become if you let your mind be fully awake, even if no one else joined you? This is the heart of the matter. Intelligence is not a curse, but society often treats it like one. And if you don't learn to embrace and protect your intellectual independence, you'll spend your life shrinking to fit spaces never meant to hold you. The isolation of insight, why clarity can feel like loneliness, and why that's okay. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, it comes from seeing too clearly, from understanding too deeply, from watching the world chase shadows while you stand there bewildered, trying to point toward the light. It's not the loneliness of abandonment or rejection. It's the loneliness of insight. The strange distance that forms between you and the rest of the world when your mind operates on a different frequency. And the more you understand, the more you begin to feel like an exile, not from a place, but from the collective illusion most people call normal. Clarity isolates. That's something no one tells you when they praise intelligence. They don't mention that seeing through deception, whether in politics, media, social dynamics, or even personal relationships, can make you feel like you've been handed a map no one else wants to read. You recognize patterns others dismiss. You question rules others follow blindly. You notice contradictions in conversations, fragility in ideas dressed up as certainty. Fragility in ideas dressed up as certainty. And all of it leaves you wondering, why doesn't anyone else seem to notice? Or worse, do they notice and just not care? This is where Schopenhauer becomes painfully relevant. He believed that the more intelligent a person is, the more solitary their life becomes, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. When you're surrounded by people who mistake noise for depth, compliance for wisdom, and consensus for truth, solitude becomes a sanctuary. The thinking mind needs space to question, to process, to wander through uncomfortable truths without being pulled back into the comforting haze of convention. But let's be honest, solitude, even when chosen, can still sting. We are social creatures. We want to connect. We want to be seen, understood, mirrored. And when that doesn't happen, when your thoughts echo back at you in silence, it's tempting to retreat, to stop sharing, to start pretending, to simulate normalcy so you don't have to feel like the alien in the room. But every time you do that, a part of you dies. The part of you that was born to think freely, to speak truthfully, to live authentically. So what's the alternative? Do we embrace the loneliness? Is that really the price of clarity? In a way, yes, but it's not as bleak as it sounds. Because there's a beauty beneath the isolation, a kind of inner authority that comes from no longer needing consensus to validate your reality. When you accept the solitude that comes with insight, you begin to move differently. You stop broadcasting your worth. You stop chasing likes. You stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Instead, you cultivate depth. You build an inner world so rich, so grounded, that external noise starts to lose its grip on you. And sometimes, just sometimes, you find others who live in that same kind of solitude. People who've also looked behind the curtain and kept walking. When those souls meet, the recognition is instant. There's no need for small talk or performance. You speak the same language, the language of thinkers, seekers, truth dwellers. These connections are rare, but they are real. And they remind you that while clarity may isolate, it also opens the door to a different kind of belonging, one not based on conformity, but on resonance. Let me ask you something that may quietly haunt you. When was the last time you felt truly understood, not just heard, but deeply seen for who you are and how you think? If that moment feels distant or non-existent, you're not broken, you're just rare. And rarity isn't a flaw, it's a signal, a sign that you were never meant to walk the well-trodden path. You were meant to carve a new one. So yes, clarity can feel like loneliness, but in that loneliness there is strength, there is vision, there is freedom, and if you can learn to live in that space, without bitterness, without resentment, without the need to be rescued by recognition, you become something powerful. You become someone who doesn't just see the world more clearly, you become someone who helps remake it. The fear of the thinker, why societies silence their most aware minds. There's a long history of societies turning against their most perceptive minds. Not because those thinkers were wrong, but because they were too right, too early. They saw through the veil, spoke uncomfortable truths, and challenged the narratives that held the collective psyche together. And for that, they were exiled, imprisoned, mocked, or ignored. Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth, because he asked too many questions. Galileo was silenced for daring to say that the Earth was not the center of the universe. Even Schopenhauer, in his own time, was ridiculed for his bleak yet piercing observations about human nature and suffering. All of them, in one way or another, threatened the fragile equilibrium that society needs to maintain its illusions. And that's why societies fear the thinker. Not because the thinker is dangerous, but because the truth they carry is. But why is this fear so powerful? Why does awareness provoke such resistance? It's because most of what holds civilizations together is not truth. It's agreement, shared myths, unspoken rules, arbitrary hierarchies, and collective beliefs masquerading as facts. These things create order. They give people a sense of stability, identity, and meaning. But when a highly intelligent individual walks into that structure and begins to question it, not with anger or aggression, but with clarity and logic, the whole thing begins to tremble. The thinker becomes a mirror, and society doesn't like what it sees. And so, instead of investigating the question, society attacks the questioner. It's easier to silence the voice than to confront what that voice reveals. That's why you'll often find that the more intelligent someone is, the more resistance they face, not just from institutions, but from peers, friends, even family. People don't like their comfort disturbed. They don't want to be reminded that their views are borrowed, their opinions unexamined, their lives shaped by forces they never chose. And when someone comes along who sees through all of it, it doesn't feel enlightening, it feels threatening. This is why intelligent people often feel pressure to tone it down, to make their truths more palatable, to package their insights in digestible, non-threatening ways. But here's the danger in that. When thinkers censor themselves to accommodate society's fragility, we all lose. Progress stalls, growth halts, innovation dies in silence, because the very minds that could push us forward are being forced to stand still. You see this everywhere, in the workplace where visionary ideas are buried under bureaucracy, in education where creativity is replaced by conformity, on social media where complex thought is reduced to sound bites, and worst of all, in relationships where people hide their intellectual depth to avoid being seen as too intense or too different. But what if the problem isn't the thinker? What if the problem is a society that rewards surface over depth, obedience over originality, comfort over truth? Let me ask you something that might sting. Have you ever felt the need to hide your intelligence just to be accepted? To downplay what you see, what you know, just to make others feel less threatened? And if so, what did that cost you? What parts of yourself did you have to bury to fit into a space that wasn't built for your mind? These are the questions we need to start asking, not just as individuals, but as a culture. Because if we keep silencing our thinkers, we'll be left with noise, not wisdom. Consensus, not clarity. But here's the paradox. Even though society fears the thinker, it also needs them, desperately. Because it's the thinkers, the ones who ask, who challenge, who refuse to accept easy answers, who move us forward. Every great leap in science, philosophy, art, and human understanding began with a mind that didn't fit in, a mind that refused to be quiet. So if you are that kind of person, don't shrink, don't apologize for thinking deeply, for seeing clearly, for speaking truthfully. You may not be understood right away. You may even be resisted, but in time, your voice could be the one that makes others finally question the script they've been following all their lives. The power of the outsider, how the misunderstood shape the future. There's something quietly revolutionary about the outsider, the person who never quite fits, who walks a different path, who seems to live slightly out of step with the rhythm of the world. At first glance, they appear isolated, maybe even lost. But if you look closer, you'll see something else. You'll see vision, you'll see resilience, you'll see someone who has chosen truth over popularity, depth over ease, and authenticity over approval. And in the long run, it is these individuals, the misunderstood, the dismissed, the too intense, who end up shaping the world. The outsider has a unique vantage point. Because they're not absorbed in the crowd, they can see the crowd more clearly. They can identify patterns others miss. They're not trapped in the echo chamber of groupthink, so their ideas are unfiltered, original, sometimes even radical. And yes, that makes them a target. But it also makes them a threat to stagnation. Every major shift, intellectual, cultural, scientific, has come from someone who wasn't afraid to be different. Someone who was willing to be doubted, ridiculed, even hated, because they believed in something bigger than acceptance. Think of the names we now revere as genius. Van Gogh died virtually unknown. Nietzsche was called mad. Hypatia was murdered. These weren't just thinkers, they were outsiders. And they paid for their vision with solitude, with suffering, with misunderstanding. But their legacy proves something extraordinary, that being right too early is often indistinguishable from being wrong until time catches up. So if you've ever felt like the world isn't designed for how your mind works, you're not broken, you're ahead. And yes, that can be lonely. It can be exhausting. It can make you question your value when others can't see what you see. But your value isn't determined by their readiness. It's determined by the truth you carry. And if you protect that truth, nurture it, build it into something real, you become unstoppable. Not because society gave you permission, but because you no longer need it. Here's the critical shift. Stop waiting to be invited in. The rooms that reject you were never meant to contain you. The systems that don't recognize your worth were never built to measure it. You are not here to fit. You are here to create, to disrupt, to illuminate. And that will feel uncomfortable, sometimes even unbearable. But bear it anyway, because the future is always built by those who can see beyond the present. Let me leave you with one final question. What would you dare to become if you no longer needed to be understood? Think about that. Let it sit with you. Because the moment you stop seeking validation from a world that fears depth, you unlock your real power. The power to live, think, and act freely. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. That's what the outsider does. That's what the misunderstood offer. Not just new ideas, but new possibilities. They don't just challenge the world, they expand it. So don't fear being different, fear being forgettable. Because in a world that resists change, the greatest force you can be is the one that refuses to stay silent. And maybe, just maybe, that's how you change everything.